Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Hone. I'm the president and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us this morning for our COVID-19 Recovery Roundtable. And today's focus is on small business. And we are so grateful for tools such as Zoom to keep us together, even if we can't actually be together in person. Everyone at the Alliance hopes you're doing your part to be safe and stay healthy, to practice physical distancing is the new language out there. It's physical distancing, and help us all to flatten the curve. I just want to also acknowledge for the moment, I think all of us are appreciative of the healthcare workers and also all the essential workers who are making sure that we can comply with the governor's orders to stay home and who are fighting on the front lines of the COVID-19 outbreak. We can't thank them enough. And a huge thanks to many of our members on this call today who have answered our call to help support the community in countless ways. I want to make sure we really give a moment to let our members on this broadcast be aware of our resource page, which is www.portlandalliance.com/COVID-19. You'll notice there's great posts, whether from the SBA or from lenders and other folks. That's the place to go. So again, www.portlandalliance.com/COVID-19. You can follow us on social media for updates, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and elsewhere at PDX_BizAlliance. And of course, #PBA events. Recording of this presentation and links for resources mentioned will be available shortly after we wrap up this morning. And of course, none of these events could happen without the support of our members. Thank you for choosing to be a member of Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce. So with that, this morning we are talking about what is being done to help small businesses in this economic crisis. And 2 weeks ago, we were proud to partner with our colleagues at Prosper Portland, the city's economic development agency, on boosting their emergency relief fund for small businesses through grants and loans. And many of our members in the banking industry stepped up in a major way to assist in that quick reaction fund, and I want to call them out by name in alphabetical order. It's Bank of America, Columbia Bank, JP Morgan Chase, Key Bank, Umpqua, US Bank, and Wells Fargo all stepped in to help bolster the city's efforts for an immediate response. As you may have heard, the applications for small business relief have overwhelmed the system, and many organizations are working around the clock to help address that need, which is why I am very happy to introduce our panelists today, some very busy people who have taken the time to talk to us about what is being done to help small businesses. And I want to start by welcoming Marty Golden, the District Director of the U.S. Small Business Administration here in Portland. And we are also joined by two guests from the banking industry. Please welcome Jessica Beck, Vice President and SBA Business Development Officer with Wells Fargo SBA Lending, and Jonathan Dale, Regional Executive for Pacific Northwest Commercial and Corporate Banking with Umpqua Bank. Good morning to all of you.
Morning.
Morning.
So let's make sure we all understand the basics of the small business relief programs that are available through the SBA. There's the Paycheck Protection Program and the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Marty, let's start with you first. Can you explain what each of these do and what the differences are? And then, of course, Jessica, Jonathan, just chime in if there's things that need to be added to color that commentary.
Thank you, I will. And thanks for having me on today. I appreciate the chance to talk about our a little bit. And so, as was mentioned, we have two major loan programs. One is called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and one is the Payroll Protection Program. So the biggest difference between the two is how you access those. So the EIDL is accessed through the SBA's website. And so there's an online application. It's actually very easy now. The initial online application was very difficult and crashed, and people had a really searing experience with that, even the ones that could get through finally. But the new system is about 10 or 15 minutes. And at the end of that process, you get a loan number and you've applied for an EIDL. The PPP program is run through banks like Umpqua and Wells Fargo. So you would go to whoever your local bank is and ask if they're participating in the PPP program. If they are, you can apply with them. It's a very short application. If they're not participating, or they're only participating with their own customers first, then you can go to other local banks and basically look for a bank that's willing to take my application. And that program is a $10 million maximum loan. It's really a program that's designed for paying employees to be on the payroll. So in effect, it's almost like unemployment, where even if the employees aren't working, the program is designed to rehire them back, and your payroll for those employees will be forgiven under the program if you use the amounts, the proceeds correctly. So you can also use proceeds to pay for a limited number of other things: rent, interest on mortgage debt, and utilities. Whereas the EIDL program can be used for a lot more different things: accounts payable, inventory, pretty much all operating expenses of a business. And so they're really kind of designed for different purposes. The EIDL is also only $2 million, and it comes with a very long repayment period of up to 30 years. Interest rate is, I think I mentioned, 3.75%. In either program, you're not going to need to guarantee it. For the PPP, there's no guarantees at all. Under the EIDL program, guarantees kick in over $200,000. So the PPP program, there's no collateral, no guarantee. Any amounts that are not forgiven will turn into a 2-year term loan, which will be repayable at 2 years, over time. And so why don't I just kind of stop there, and I'll take questions on those. But those are the essential differences between the two programs.
Jessica, Jonathan, anything you want to add to that commentary?
No, I think that was a great summation. We're focused on PPP. I think everybody is right now, but we have had several that went into the EIDL because of the fast turnaround, I believe. And Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, that was a very fast, like 3-day guaranteed turnaround. So it was kind of that instant relief. And then it was nice that the PPP was designed not to disqualify those that took the EIDL. It's an and, not an or. So it was a really nice, thoughtful way that I thought it was laid out, especially with as massive as PPP was, and as fast as not only the government but banks needed to bring it to market.
That's great. And just for everyone to make sure they remember, you should definitely be using, I see already very active chat function going on right now. Appreciate the Senator's office sending out some updated information on the PPP lenders here in Oregon. That's great. Really appreciate it. And then for all of you who are on the broadcast, if you have a question, we encourage you to go to the Q&A section and drop your question in there, and we will get to a point after some of these initial rounds of questions to hear from me for all of you to chime in as members in that function. Make sure to identify your business and where you're doing business and where you are today. We'd appreciate that. So I want to move on to another question a little bit. Marty, for folks that want to apply for either of those programs, those mainline programs, tell us what the qualifying factors are. I think it's just important for people to know what businesses are eligible and how they can apply.
So really, almost all businesses are eligible. There's very few differences between the two programs. There's some more not-for-profits can apply for the EIDL that can apply for the PPP. Pretty much 501c3s and veteran organizations and charitable organizations can apply for the PPP, while a range of not-for-profit organizations can apply for the EIDL. And both programs, you have to meet size standards. We're waiving those to some extent under the PPP program. So any company with less than 500 employees can apply for a PPP. Over that, if you're over 500, it would depend on your size standards, your normal size standards. But for the vast majority of small businesses, as well as independent contractors and sole proprietors, you can apply for either program. And as Jonathan mentioned, you can use both loans. So the only restriction is you don't use the loans for the same purpose. So if, for instance, you use the PPP to cover payroll and rent, you can apply for an EIDL and use those proceeds for accounts payable, inventory, and other things that you can't use the PPP for.
Great question. I see something here is this has been something unique to this program and this response, and I hope our bakers can also weigh in on this. Sole proprietors and folks that are independent workers out there, are they eligible for these programs? And have you had experiences working with independent workers that would be applying for some of this SBA relief?
Yeah, no, they certainly apply for the PPP, certainly. They just fill it out just like a business owner would.
That's
So we
great.
started taking applications for independent contractors and sole proprietors under the PPP program on the 10th. Or I shouldn't say we started taking, the bank started being able to take those.
That's great. For our colleagues here with Umpqua and with Wells, how does this look at your banks? What is Wells Fargo or Umpqua Bank customers current or new, either one? What do they need to do to access these programs through your institutions? And how about businesses that have already applied, they're waiting to learn if they've received one of the PPP loans? How are you doing work through the applications that have already come in?
Jessica, you want to take that first?
Sure. So Wells Fargo, we're servicing our existing business customers first because we're following the Bank Secrecy Act requirements. So I would strongly suggest anyone looking at applying, I would start with your existing banking relationship. And to qualify at Wells Fargo, you need to have a banking account prior to February 15th at our bank. And so our application's all online. We're not accepting paper applications. So what you simply do is you log into your business banking portal and you'll answer 5 questions, and that'll place you into the queue that we have. And then once we reach your point in the queue, we're releasing the application, which is one online. It's the 2-page application that the SBA and the U.S. Treasury Office has released that you complete. And you'll also submit your payroll verification that's required with PPP, and then reviewing that information, processing it, and closing it. We just ask for your patience because we're obviously receiving a lot of requests. But yeah, we're working through existing customers first.
Yeah, so at Umpqua Bank, similar process. I think, both Wells, it sounds like Wells and Umpqua land at the same place quickly. Ours is also vis-a-vis an intake form on our website. So similar questions, name of the company, name of the principal, just some kind of high-level basic information. What that allows us to do is then send our secure link out, which drives our application process through a DocuSign format. So we've taken the SBA application to its letter, essentially, and made it into a smart form so they can click through it very, very easily. Very intuitive on where our clients can upload the supporting documentation, which again is pretty basic, right? So your 941s, your 944s, your payroll statement for mid-February to make sure that you're in business. And this is really more of processing than underwriting. It's kind of a decision tree. So it's and again, as SBA's guidance evolved, that's been a little bit easier on the banks. At Umpqua Bank, we were, I believe, the first bank in the West to market with this. And those were some very interesting conversations because SBA and the feds, we're doing everything they can. Everybody's working really hard to get guidance out. But it was one of the first times, at least in my career, where, as banks, as rigid as we kind of are as an industry, where we just kind of jumped in and said, hey, you know what? We'll take the guidance we have. We'll figure this out along the way. And it was kind of a great intrapreneurship experience for a lot of us that just kind of pulled long hours. And SBA would come out with guidance, we'd apply it and move forward. So it was very iterative. We knew that it wouldn't be perfect out the gate, but just bringing the relief to the market as quickly as we possibly could was our primary focus. And I'm proud to say that we were able to do that. So it's been nice. It's a very easy experience for the applicant. And the process, again, as far as most loans concerned, it's very, very fast. And we found the bottleneck to be more on the issuance of PLPs and the E-Trans system than it has been actually processing on the front end.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that the banks have done a great job of putting this into place. There was a lot of confusion. There's still a lot of confusion. There's guidance that hasn't yet come out yet. And they did a great job. It's turned up and going on 90% information, maybe not even 90%. And right now, nationwide, we're, I think, at 750,000 loans approved for $200 billion. Wow. So, nationwide, the money's starting to move.
Well, we're on the just topic of number. I'm just curious, Jessica, Jonathan, you guys have been banking for a while. Give us a sense of scale for what has come into your banks and your purview on this program as it compares to normal course of business, just so we give everybody a sense of what you guys are undertaking right now.
Certainly. Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's been very I mean, I've been in SBA lending for 15 years, 8 years at Wells Fargo, and just the volume of calls in the last 2 weeks, it's been so overwhelming. And yeah, we're just trying to move through them as fast as we can to help people.
Yeah, so at Umpqua Bank, and I'll use round numbers, but we typically do between 1,500 to 2,000 loans a month, right? We're a $30 billion regional bank, and that's pretty good volume. So that's per month. We got 6,800 applications in our first week, and now we're right at about 8,000 through our process. So 1,200 to 1,500% increase in scale is kind of, Andrew, I think the question you're asking. And then, you know, the follow on, how are you processing this, right? And so again, it was one of, and I'll look back in 30 years back on 2020 very, very fondly. How do you do that, right? It throws convention out the window. So our ability to flex across our whole enterprise on processors and approvers, and literally having people, you know, on a 24-hour pivot. If yesteryear you were doing, you know, a job in underwriting, or even in loan processing, or sometimes even our bankers, right? We've taken them off and flexed into whatever is needed to get these things through. And so it's been inspiring. You know, we delegated authorities to certain people and asked for volunteers. And if I'm being honest, we had more volunteers than we could even have help. It was actually, not even arguably, in no uncertain terms, the most inspiring part of my career thus far is the way that our associates stepped up. And we're talking 20-hour days, 15-hour days. I did take Easter off, and that's just me. And I'm sure 200 people at our bank could say exactly the same thing, that have just been working, not for any other reason that to bring relief to the small businesses of our footprint. It's been absolutely inspiring, and everybody's just, their heart is fully engaged in it. It's special.
That's great to hear. I think it refreshes why you got into the work that you do. And I heard that comment recently from a banker I really respect. And I think we can all appreciate the hours you have been working, and what it means for each one of these closings to happen means a business gets a lifeline and a future to go on. So thank you for all your work, and your teams. Obviously, if they're out there and listening, we appreciate what you guys have been doing, obviously in conjunction with the SBA. So Marty, I want to get a sense of the status of the overall program. You know, we've heard that the EID program has had to limit grants to $15,000 for every applicant, and the PPP program is already on track to reach the $350 billion limit, which is remarkable. So what is the current information that the SBA has as it relates to those programs?
Sure. Yeah, the PPP program, as I mentioned, we have $349 billion of money that's been authorized by Congress. I'm told, about $200 billion, and today it'll be more than $200 billion. So I understand that there's legislation that's currently being looked at within the Senate and the House of Representatives, and so I don't have any special insight into whether that's going to happen, but I know that our political leaders are aware of the limits that we're getting near, and hopefully they'll be taking some action there. The EIDL program has had some issues in terms of the numbers of people that have been applying. The money hasn't gone out as fast as we thought it would. And I didn't mention, as part of the EIDL, one of the things that the CARES Act covered as well was money for a so-called advanced EIDL, so people would go in and apply for an advance. And originally the messaging that went out was up to 10,000 per business. And while it was always up to 10,000 per business, it looks to me like they're going to be doing $1,000 per employee, up to $10,000. So it depends on the number of employees. Many people who have applied for the EIDL haven't heard anything. There's been a lot of frustration there. And I share that frustration. We don't have any information really in the field about where people are in that program. We know the money's been going out slowly, and there frankly is just dynamic issues I think there are conversations between the U.S. Treasury and the SBA, and we're really hoping to get more information on that. And as soon as we do, we'll put that out. But there has been pretty widespread frustration with the EIDL program and how fast money is going out or not going out, maybe is a better way to say it.
To our bankers, it's similar experience, and what's been happening now that we're sort of maybe reaching some of these limits. Can companies still come to you? Can they still apply? Give us a sense, knowing some of these restrictions, how you guys manage that on your end.
Yeah, so again, our intake form is still up on our website. Everybody who has completed that link to date has been emailed our link for application. And to kind of paraphrase on what Marty said, we're optimistic and hopeful that the government will bolster this program. I still think that there are a lot of small businesses, and by that I mean the sub 500 employee limit that the PPP applies to. I still think there's a lot of businesses that are out there hurting that need the relief. So is 350 enough? I think we're all aligned there, and I'm optimistic. That said, we're all charging towards that target right now. So how do we ensure that we absolutely get as many of our customers and applicants the relief that they've applied for? And so that's our top priority right now. And for perspective, the SBA, and this is nationally, they funded about $28 billion in 2019. And here we are in what, Marty, 6 business days, arguably with a handful of business days of a $350 billion package. So, Andrew, you asked how are banks dealing with kind of the pig in the python, so to speak. It's very much on our SBA partners as well that we've worked hand in glove with as an industry for decades. So I'm optimistic. The other thing Umpqua Bank's done too, outside of PPP, is obviously some deferral work with our existing clients to make sure that at least we can give them 60 or 90 days of reprieve in conjunction with many of those that are also applying for PPP. So just doing whatever we can, understanding this is temporary. This happened to us, but not by us. And so as good stewards of our communities, it's our job.
How about you, Jessica?
Yeah, so we're still accepting applications, and I've been telling people, even if you don't necessarily feel like you need it today, it's probably a good idea to get in the queue so at least you have access to those funds if you do need it. It's a 1% interest loan, so if you don't end up getting forgiven, it's really low interest rate. So it's definitely worth companies applying if you feel you may need the funds. They did extend, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the date that you can apply till, but it's June 30th you have to apply.
Great. I just note we put out a poll, and the quick response was interesting about whether or not folks had already applied to SBA programs, and about half our respondents said that they had, the other half had not, and then quite a few had said that they indicated they would apply. So there'll be more work for you to do in the near future. Marty, the U.S. Chamber, which does obviously the federal lobbying for our greater business community, sent a letter to congressional leaders in the White House urging them to provide more funding to both these programs. So give us a little bit under the hood. How does SBA communicate with Congress and White House on these sort of matters? What's the interplay there? What are you hearing from leadership within the SBA on their positioning with these two critical pieces of the recovery pie?
Well, as much as I like to say that I'm in the middle of everything, I really can't claim any knowledge of what our leadership does with Congress, frankly.
Well, that's fair enough. And I think it's also good to know we've had such a great congressional delegation. We're sitting here on the 14th floor of World Trade Center and can say that Senator Merkley's office have really paid, and along with all of our congressional reps, paid close attention to the needs of small businesses within our communities. So we will stay tuned to that, but we really, obviously, it's clear the resources are needed. These banks have been doing great work along with you and the SBA in terms of getting dollars onto the street to our members. So thank you. And I want to touch on something that, Jonathan, you had brought up a little bit earlier that's also really important, because I've been a part of a lot of these conversations about what other resources are available for small businesses. And what I have seen and really want to call out for all the lenders out there, and especially interesting working with the property owners right now about businesses who are in a shutdown mode, who, you know, can't take revenue in, working with their landlords to defer rent, and then working with the lenders to help on relief on the back end. It's been really special to see the work between tenant, landlord, lender. You know, Jonathan, you had mentioned this about deferral programs. Maybe tease out, Jessica and Jonathan, what else are you seeing with your customers and applicants as what's happening besides SBA, some of the creative work that you are doing behind the scenes?
Yeah, Jessica, you want to take that?
Yeah, so as part of the CARES Act, it hasn't been mentioned yet that the government's making their 7A and 504 loan payments on the debenture for the 504. So we service all debentures in the country. So all of those payments have been turned off, at least the customer's payment. So believe it or not, the government's making those debenture payments. And then we also service $10 billion in SBA 7A loans. And so those payments are also being paid by the government. So that's huge for existing SBA customers. Wells Fargo is also granting payment relief for small business customers up to 90 days, as well as fee waivers, payment deferrals, increases to lines of credit for disaster relief, and other expanded assistance to deposit, small business lending, practice finance, and then SBA, of course. So if anyone's needing this temporary relief, we're also stopping any foreclosure related activity, but definitely contact Wells Fargo right away if you need any of this and you're a customer. Just go to wellsfargo.com/coronavirus to access that.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Actually, you made a point that I was hoping to make later. Is in addition to PPP and EIDL, anybody with an existing 504 7A or microloan, the SBA, or through the government, I should say, will be making those payments for 6 months, and you need to go to your banks for that.
Yeah, no, and Jessica, that was a great summation. You know, to kind of zoom back up to 30,000 feet, you know, here to address your question, I wouldn't say it's neat to see because everybody's hurting, and by no means am I trying to downplay that no matter what we do, it's going to not be enough, right? For a lot of people, a lot of our fellow Americans. But if you look at, you know, the ability to not pay rent if you're a tenant to your landlord for a period of time, and some of that trickling into even businesses not able to pay their rent. And then what does that mean? So now we have, you know, real estate loans that can't make their payments temporarily. So I think what you found is banks being accommodating to that for these 60, 90-day deferrals. You know, and other means you had asked, you know, where else are we lending into? You know, while a lot of companies are hurting, others are expanding, answering the call, answering the bell, right? What we're seeing with food delivery companies, for example, or Amazon flexing their workforce to make sure that people can bring things to us because we can't go out in public. So it is kind of neat to see that in our country, arguably our biggest pressure test that we've had in a long, long time, that the spiderweb effect of good ideas coming together and working together. And a lot of things do land at banks. We're the lifeblood of the economy, right? People deposit their excess dollars with us, and then we lend debt capital into the markets for growth. And so we realize and own that responsibility as an industry that money comes in and out of our institutions. And again, we're trying our absolute best to be good stewards and be as accommodating as absolutely possible. And so far from what we've seen with, again, Marty and our SBA partners, trying to do whatever we can just to kind of get through this, you know, hopefully 60, 90-day period where we can kind of come back out and put the economy back online.
That's a great segue point here too. For those of you who don't know, the governor of Oregon will be hosting a 11 o'clock press conference on how she and the state intend to think about reopening the economy. What does that look like with no timelines, you know, attached right now? But the idea is that we're going to start to get into that process, and hopefully we'll have made it through this temporary pain points as best as possible through the good work of folks on this call. And I want to transition this now into some really great questions we've gotten from folks that are on this call right now. And just as a reminder, another poll just went out, so please fill that out if you can. Love to get that feedback. But I want to start with Deborah Field with Paper Jam Press, which is a great name, of course. With PBA member, thank you, Deborah, for your membership. So she's applied for the $10,000 grant through the SBA, but hasn't heard word back yet, and applied on the opening day. how do I know how do I know her application was received and the status of that application? Give a little technical assistance here to Deborah.
Sure. So if you applied before March 30th, which is roughly when the new online portal went out, you're going to need to reapply, unfortunately. Unless you obviously haven't gotten the loan, because you wouldn't be asking the question. Unless you're in active discussions with the loan officer, and again, you're probably not, you're going to need to reapply using the new online portal. So that's guidance that was supposed to have gone out to everybody via email if they had included an email. If you didn't get that, I apologize, but you're going to need to reapply under the new online portal. The good news there is that it's pretty quick. Now, if it sounds like you may have applied under the new online portal if you're talking about the $10,000, because that was a question that was on the online portal, the new online portal, not the old one. But in any case, if you need to reapply, you can check the box near the end of the application that asks if you want to be considered for the up to $10,000 advance loan. And as I mentioned earlier, the amounts that are going to be released there sound like they're going to be closer to $1,000 per employee. And if you're a sole proprietor, you would count as an employee that way. Once your application is in, you're going to have to wait to be contacted by somebody. And I know it's been slow. I don't have any good information on the status of those applications. It's just a question of having to wait, unfortunately.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for that, Marty, update, Marty. And just a note, when we put out the poll about whether or not they've applied and have received funding yet. So interesting marker here. So of all the respondents that had applied for SBA funding, around 4% had received the funds, and another 96% have not yet received the funds. So obviously getting the cash out the door is the critical element in the next couple of weeks. So we'll hope to see those numbers flip in the meantime. I want to now turn to Sarah Lister, who is from Solve, is a great organization, statewide organization that helps to make sure that our public spaces are clean and tidy and engage Oregonians in volunteer service. So Solve, who is a PBA member, thank you so much for that, applied 2 weeks ago for an EIDL advance. Got an application number, but hadn't heard anything back since then. Marty, so I'm going to guess similar story here. Do you want to take that one?
The same thing. There's an 800 number that you can call and ask what status is. It's not clear whether or not the people that are on the 800 number even have access to the system to be able to tell you where you are in the queue. And unfortunately, the only advice I can give you right now is just to wait. And I have no reason to think there's anything wrong with your application, because a lot of the applications are sitting there. I'm just not sure how much money has gone out the door there yet.
Got it. Thank you, Marty. Now I want to turn to a hard-hitting question from Richard Uvenko, who's from Wells Fargo. So I think, Jessica, you have an absolute obligation to have to answer this one if you can, or Marty too. So, but from a great member of the Portland Business Alliance, Wells Fargo, Richard, thanks for your question. Does having a PPP loan disqualify a business from applying for the Main Street lending program?
Do you know the answer to that, Marty, or not?
No, I don't know that much about that yet. Yeah.
I don't think the rules have been released yet.
From Wells Fargo.
Yeah, I know that the line in the sand on that is the 500 employees. So if you're claiming to be less than 500 and north of 500, I would defer obviously to counsel on that, but I don't have clear guidance on it either.
Gotcha. Okay, and I just want to note too, similar to Saul, we got another question from Bernhild Nizwant of the Hanslick Group that asked about the IDL. So hopefully that answered your question earlier, Bernhild. So appreciate you asking that question. And now really, here's interesting, talking about the interplay between federal programming. Sharon Rose City Acupuncture and Massage. Boy, I think we could all use both of those things in spades right now, but we can't, unfortunately, Sharon, we're sorry. But can you address for all of us whether or not there's a conflict between unemployment insurance and PPP? Sharon is a sole proprietor. She has no employees over here in Beaverton, Oregon, and has been closed since the executive orders came out. Does Sharon need to wait until after PPP is exhausted to get unemployment insurance? And she applied for UI and SBA several weeks ago, but haven't heard anything back, and is just expending on payroll and rent. Everything else has been turned off. So what's the interplay between unemployment insurance and PPP for those who are sole proprietors? Interesting kind of question there.
So you cannot receive both, and I'm just relaying what I've heard on the phone from other people. If you're a sole proprietor, I think it's your decision as to which you want to go after. If you have employees, if you apply for the PPP and you're willing to hire back employees and they don't want to take the job, theoretically or practically speaking, they're not eligible for unemployment insurance. So because I think as the unemployment insurance goes, they ask the employers if this person has a job available, and if you say yes they do, then they're not eligible for unemployment insurance. You're certainly not able to double dip, but if you're a sole proprietor or any employee for that matter, well, that's not true, I just contradicted that. If you're a sole proprietor and you want to take one, you don't have to take a PPP, you don't have to apply for it, you can just apply for unemployment insurance.
Great, thank you, Marty. And now a question from Nay Zhao with Prosper Portland, a member and just a great ally here in the city, has been doing really remarkable work. Kimberly Branham and her team have really been spearheading efforts to help small businesses in our city. So the question is this: so if someone had a personal banking account, say with Wells Fargo, would they be able to open a business account immediately and be able to apply with Wells Fargo? So kind of a question about being an existing customer if you're on the personal side as opposed to the business side.
Yeah, unfortunately, with how the legislation is written, you had to have a business account open prior to February 15th. That's how we're operating. So unfortunately, you could not open that today. I have heard of other institutions that are taking applications for non-customers. I believe, I don't know if they're on the call, but I believe Key Bank and US Bank are taking non-customers. I've heard of an online lender called Cabbage that is a non-customer supply as well. So those are three options. And I'd use the SBA search to also contact other banks. Jonathan, I don't know if are you guys following similar rules to that February 15th?
I would say we're kind of a hybrid. What we did when we said, quote unquote, what is an existing customer, was do they bank with Umpqua Bank? So, for example, we could have a depositor in our retail shop that perhaps their small business account was, down the street. We've said, no, you are a client of ours, we'll take care of you. So to Jessica's point, they did have to be in business, February 15th. We didn't interpret that as needing to be kind of with us. So I'd say those are the exceptions, not the rule. Most of our applicants have been our business customers. I think that's 80-85%. But we have been accommodating to those that are business people that have a relationship with a bank. There are some other ones that are accepting non-customers. I won't speak to how they're prioritized over there, but that's how we've been handling it. And then a handful of customers that have reached out to us that were non-customers. To answer the second part of your question, Andrew, yes, they can absolutely, if they need to open a business account with us as part of this process, they're absolutely welcome to do that. I don't believe SBA requires them to open an account with the institution, but we found that 95, maybe even 100% of people want to, just so they can quickly get their funds placed in a business checking account. So we kind of run those parallel outside of the PPP program, is getting their accounts open and up and running to house the deposits with us.
Great, thank you for that. And now Christine Hine with Ringbender LLP. I think it just got that note. She's asking, have SBA loans actually been funded yet? So we just saw through that online poll that, in fact, yes, some dollars have gotten out the door, and obviously working to get more out the door. But there are, in fact, dollars that have been put out the door and approved, which is great news. So hopefully you saw that in our poll, Christine. And now a question from Marilyn McEvers of Paper Products Marketing, which is a PBA member. Thank you, Marilyn, so much. We appreciate that. Interesting question here. If you have a foreign parent company can you get the PPP loan? Does your parent, and here's the special asterisk here, does your parent company's employee count towards the 500 number of employees? And I suspect this is applicable not only to foreign-owned companies, but also for locally owned companies that might have multiple entities reporting into a holding company of some sort, where the totality of the employee count might be much higher, but the individual business is below the threshold. So what can you tell Marilyn McEvers at Paper Products Marketing?
So having a foreign parent does not disqualify you from taking a loan as long as you have a US-based business with US-based employees. And in terms of the 500, my understanding is that if you have an EIN for a business entity within the United States and you have less than 500 employees in general, or if you're in the right industry, you can have more than 500 employees, then you can apply for a PPP under every EIN that you have.
Great. And now I see we have sort of one more question here, and then I think that's going to dial up almost all of our questions, unless there's other folks out there that have additional questions for our panelists. And of course, just as a reminder, we post this recording online. And if there's questions we haven't been able to get to, or you feel like you need a little bit more of a direct connection, make sure to reach out to us, and we will happily connect you with each of these great folks who are here on this call with us. So the last question, one more time from our colleague Richard over at Wells Fargo. So any idea on the amount the interest is, and do you think Congress will have to pass more than the already promised $250 billion to support all the interest? If so, how much? Which this is a big question. So who wants to take a stab at that?
So the PPP carries interest of 1% for any amounts that are not forgiven. And that's going to have a 2-year term. EIDL does not, aside from the up to $10,000 advance, does not have a mechanism for forgiving debt. That loan carries interest of 3.75%, and it will be amortized over a period up to 30 years. My understanding is it's either a 15-year term or a 30-year term.
Got it. Well, here I see 2 more quick questions have popped up. This is from NAI Elliott, great member of the Alliance. Mike Larkin, thank you so much for asking. This is a really good one here about timing, because so much of this is based on timing. We're hearing a lot of concern from restaurants and retailers, obviously the ones that are just most impacted by the stay-at-home orders, about the 8-week window for expenses under the PPP. There's some confusion around timing when they are not sure when funding will occur, when they can reopen, and what if they had a rent deferred by a landlord reducing their expenses? Is there talk about extending the coverage period to impact the state of emergency closure requirements? And I have heard this is a really interesting conversation, because the governor is, so Mike, thanks for this question. I want to kind of get a little granular. The governor issued commercial eviction moratoriums, and how do those play with some of these federal programs that mandate that you have to continue paying rent with these programs? So who can respond to Mike Larkin about this, about timing and when funding will occur?
I can respond. I wouldn't. Do you guys have anything from your side, Jessica or Jonathan? Otherwise,
I think right now, all the applicants that we've had want it kind of ASAP. I have heard the conversation on restaurateurs, if I understand the question correctly, to be, what if I want to get approved now, but can I delay my funding for 30 to 60 days when I actually open my doors kind of back up? I would defer to Marty on kind of what the SBA guidance is on that. I can say that we might have 1 or 2 of those requests out of, going on 8,000. Most of our people that have been applying are requesting immediate relief. And, going back to the 4% funding to date, I agree with Andrew. I think here in the coming days, in the next 3, 5, 7 business days, we will see that invert. And a lot of the money will start hitting the street now that the PLPs are being issued through the SBA a little bit faster than they had been in the early days. But
so,
Marty, I'll defer to you.
I think that the reason I've gotten that question a number of times, the reason this is a little bit confusing is because it's sort of counterintuitive if you're a business. Because my understanding of the way this program was put together, the whole point of it is to rehire people whether or not you have work for them. So that doesn't make sense to a business person. Like, well, why would I do that? You know, I'm not reopened. Why would I do that? Well, it's because this program was put into place so you would rehire people. The thought being that it's better to get a paycheck than to collect unemployment. It's better for the psyche. It's better for the business in terms of being able to reopen quickly once they do reopen. And so that's why this program exists under my understanding. So the clock is going to start ticking as soon as you get the first disbursement from your loan. And so what drives all this is that the SBA has a requirement for the banks to fund these loans within 10 days of approval. It used to be 5 days, but they extended it to 10 days because banks have such a crushing amount of applications to get through that they physically cannot fund and close these loans in 5 days. They just can't do it. They don't. In fact, a lot of banks have said we can't even do it in 10 days. But now the requirement is they have to do it. So if you put in an application, that application is going to get processed pretty quickly once you get to the top of the bank's queue. And then they have 10 days to close. And then when they make the initial funding, and usually that funding is in one lump sum, that's when your 8-week clock starts running. And you have to spend that PPP money over the next 8 weeks. They have to be consecutive weeks starting when you get the loan. So if you're not spending the money on rent because it's been deferred, you don't have to. You can spend the money for utilities, or you may not be able to spend the money. I guess you could potentially cut a deal with your landlord and say, I'll pay now, but then defer my rent later. I mean, that's an individual situation, I think. But yes, you do have to spend the money over the 8-week period following funding of your loan. And again, the reason is because it's not a question of whether you're reopened. It's a question of rehiring people that are not on your payroll anymore.
Marty, if I may, and I think this is relevant to answer the question too, going back to rent and utilities, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't think I am on this, Marty, but the ratchet for that sizes your loan amount, your PPP loan amount, is based on what the SBA has come out with, quote unquote, qualified payroll expenses, which are payroll expenses. Then there's some kind of ancillary expenses as well, you know, healthcare expenses, retirement expenses, some carve outs. So then you get 2.5 times that amount. When it comes to forgiveness, the forgiven portion, 75% of what you're asking for to be forgiven has to be these payroll expenses, with up to 25% comprised of utilities, rent, things like that. So intuitively, let's fast forward 8 weeks from now, your landlord, you know, forgave your rent for 2 months, or deferred. If it's a deferral, you didn't pay that, you just wouldn't capture that in what you're requesting to be forgiven, but it wasn't part of the sizing up front anyway. So
that's right.
It's a little odd that utilities and rent are going to be captured in the forgiveness piece, but not part of the sizing piece. And I don't know if it's better lucky than good. I think part of that rationale is exactly what we're speaking to, because
that's part of the reason they size it. It's basically 8 weeks payroll plus 25%. So they sort of work together, I think.
Great, and I'll sort of take one more question here before we wrap things up with a couple of announcements. But I have a question from Ferdy Ruplin, who is with Tonkin Torp, great firm here in town and a great member of the Portland Business Alliance. Thank you. The interim final rules note that the SBA will provide additional guidance on the loan forgiveness provision. Marty, do you have a sense of when that's going to be promulgated?
Soon, I hope. I was going to use something more colorful, but I think I'll not. We don't have a lot of the guidance that we expect to have eventually.
Got it.
We're still working on it.
We will stay tuned. So with that, obviously we could go on quite a bit. I just am so grateful for our colleagues, Jessica with Wells Fargo, Jonathan with Umpqua Bank. You have great board members with the Alliance. Dave Shotwell and Alicia Johnston are both on our board. We thank them for their service, and for you guys for being here with us today. And of course, with Marty Golden, so much of what you're doing and just watching the cooperation between all these great institutions. I'm sure if we had applause, we would hear it from our audience here today, which topped out at 100, and that's great to see the active engagement. So thank you guys so much for joining us here, and appreciate what you're doing for all of our businesses out there.
Thank you.
And
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you. And with that, I want to thank our speakers lastly, and then to remind folks tomorrow, 10 a.m., be back here if you want to check out the Portland Business Alliance events page. We are hosting the 2 candidates for Multnomah County District Attorney in a forum so folks can interact directly with them. And this just in, on April 22nd at 3 p.m., the Oregon Business Plan will be hosting, that's the Portland Business Alliance, Oregon Business and Industry, and Oregon Business Council will be hosting Governor Brown here for a conversation next week at 3 p.m. So that is also up and live right now if you'd like to register. So some great stuff coming out here. And once again, for all of you out there, thanks for the work that you're doing. Stay healthy, and hope to be in person sometime soon. And until then, have a great day.